Tristan Kumar's The Final Enigma. Volume 2. The Travelers and the Outcasts. Narrated and written by Tristan Kumar. Trigger warning. The following work of fiction contains the articles and themes of blood, death, drowning, murder, torture, described gore, violence to children, alcohol, smoking, suicide through hanging, gun, and jumping, suicidal thoughts, described injury, fire and arson, nightmare imagery, brief domestic abuse, and a racist comment. Please listen with care and stop if you feel triggered or provoked at any point. Thank you. Act 6. The Grim Reaper. Part 26. The Entity Outside. Bubbles quickly swam to the top of my cup like a fish being pulled from a lake as I filled my pint of beer. I turned off the handle and turned around to the others. I watched as Samantha and Deshawn walked over and introduced themselves to Xavier and Harley. Those two were starting to like each other for the month that they had been together in Colorado Springs. I watched as patient one listen to their conversation, but I couldn't help but feel bad for him. His family was all dead, and he was all alone. He was wanting to live his life, but after that was taken from him, he was forced to live past his time. The other strange thing was that he could regularly breathe the outside air despite the effects of the storm. The other weird thing was that he was apparently 112 years old because he said he was born in 1934, but he looks a day over 30. So many questions in his confused mind, and mine. He was possessed by a monster with no choice, as he told us, and he was forced into the situation we're in now. Maybe he was useful to us, but I wasn't sure what his motive was. Maybe he could be trying to take down the monster in revenge, but I didn't want to ask him to prevent our friendly relationship from becoming too personal and upsetting for the poor old man. I turned and saw Xavier. The poor boy was about to graduate but ended up with a monster of a mom. He had to walk across the country, so I was glad that he was here. I could guarantee his motive was to take down the storm in vengeance for his classmates and his mom, who were now all monsters lurking around somewhere in New York City. I looked at Harley, but I couldn't think of anything. The only thing I really knew was that she was asked by Sylvie to help upstart the revolution against Rye, but she really had no motive. I turned to Deshawn and Samantha and thought for some time. I knew that they were coming from a call that I received from Jamal a couple days ago, but he never really told me anything about them. They were probably in the same boat as Harley, simply waiting for a motive to actually decide to fight with us. And then there was me. Lightning struck outside as I drank some of my beer. My motive was complicated, I could personally say. I knew that I was the one who had to lead the travelers and somehow lead them to victory, but this was just a job, so what was my actual motive? I felt that there was only one man that we needed to complete this team, and that man was Agent 39. We had just recently lost him to Rye, and we needed to get him back. The reason I'm not saying he's dead is that Rye knows that we were starting something, so he would keep Agent 39 until we did something. Then he would counterattack by using him as a hostage. At that moment, I just couldn't figure out how we could attack with such a small team. Hopefully, somebody would come and join us, more than somebody, many, many people, but it was very unlikely due to the low amount of people left on Earth that were not dead or complete abominations of monsters. I drank some more of my beer as lightning struck again, and the thunder from the last strike finally reached us. I noticed all the distinct colors around the room. Not to say I was racist, but it was very cool to have many people from many ethnicities come and join us. Agent 39 was pretty sure Indian of some sorts, and Samantha was Hispanic. Harley and I were whites, and that left Xavier, Deshawn, and Patient 1 to be black. Though, it doesn't really matter. It was very cool, either way. I smiled that, despite all our differences in the world before and where we came from, it didn't matter now that everyone's life could be taken away from them in the blink of an eye. I sipped some more beer as more lightning and thunder struck outside. It was the future, it was dangerous, and it definitely wasn't ever safe. Except now. This was a time of relaxation before the chaos began. It had been tough trying to get used to all the new conditions of this brave new world. Living in the rubble of a once famous city and living with a mask to prevent ourselves from turning into hideous and bloodthirsty creatures lurking around in nature. It was terrible, but we all persevered through our own will and grit. Nobody really knew each other fully yet, but they knew the people who they had known for longer. Xavier and Harley knew each other and hung out more often than with the others, and the same thing for Samantha and Deshawn. If I could, I would want to talk strategy with Agent 39, but he wasn't here. If we had Agent 39 with us, we only had 7, an odd number. So, who was the odd one out? Patient 1. I sighed as I drank my beer again as lightning struck once more, but there was no thunder. Instead, there was a splash of mud outside, like something had just landed. I turned to the door and then looked around. Nobody seemed to hear it except me. I set my pipe down and walked to the window. It was raining very heavily outside. I took some deep breaths in and told myself it was nothing, but I wished that I was correct. I slowly turned the lock on the door, making sure that we were safe in here. I smiled, thinking my problem was solved, and walked back inside. Suddenly, the large clock we had in the joint rang. Everyone stopped talking and watched as it rang once. I heard the person outside again walking toward the door. I gulped as the clock ran out again. I slowly walked back toward the door, but still looking at the bell ringing. The footsteps seemed to stop in front of the door, but I wasn't ready to turn around to see yet. Goosebumps ran up my spine like they were running from death's deadly plan for them. The clock ran more and more times until it finally stopped at 12. It was midnight, and I took a deep breath in. I knew I had to turn around, but I didn't want to. I slowly slid my bandana up, ready to breathe safely, just in case the door was opened. I turned around, and 2 red lights shone directly through the window. The red lights were under a large hood, it seemed. This was a person, a being, an entity. I thought I had seen all the monsters in this cruel world, but I didn't even know what this was or how to describe it. I slowly walked back away from the window on the door as the hooded figure stared right through my cold soul. I slowly slid up my mask even tighter as the door handle suddenly shook. Everyone else was back to chatting and having fun, but I was terrified. The door handle rattled even more, but it didn't open. I watched from my peripheral view as Patient 1 came over to me. I didn't know how, but I could tell that he sensed I was disturbed by something. "What is it, Eric?" he whispered, and I hyperventilated faster and faster as the door handle shook harder and harder. We would be ripped to shreds if I didn't warn them, but it was probably already too late. For somebody who was supposed to be a good leader, I couldn't seem to do it damn well. Suddenly, the door handle stayed still. The red eyes turned to look at the door handle. It turned back to me as Patient 1 turned to it. "Don't say anything. I'll tell you when to run," I whispered to him, and he nodded and walked away. The thing outside slowly held up a broken door handle. I gasped. It was going to break in any second. "Masks on, everybody!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, not with confidence, but in pure terror and fear. Everybody suddenly gasped and grabbed their masks. They slid them on as the red eyes slowly backed into the darkness of the rain. The red eyes completely disappeared into the murky night, making me have to make something up or tell them the truth. "There's something out there," I told them. They gasped. "What did it look like?" Samantha asked. It has red eyes and a hood, but you gotta trust me, it could be very dangerous," I yelled at them. Everyone finally stood up and came to me, who was facing the door 6 feet away, not even trying to get closer. Who else saw it?" a random traveler asked, but the room went silent except for the sound of rain hitting the top of the building. It's out there, and I can sense that it's something new, something very dangerous." Patient 1 stepped up. I let out my breath of fear, thinking he was going to let me down, but luckily he didn't. "Something is out there. I saw it." "Then why didn't you say anything?" a random traveler asked him, and many people nodded in agreement. "Look, now is not the time to be arguing over something dumb. There's something out there," I said, trying to break up the arguments. "You're the delusional freak from the 60s who completely bypasses all the natural conditions we have right now. You don't have to breathe through a stupid mask, and you haven't even lived a day of sorrow or hardship for your loved ones, who are now monsters," the traveler said. I tried to stop it, but I knew that Patient 1 couldn't just let that slide. "You don't think I've lost anyone? My entire family is dead and buried in the ground we yell on right now. I could never see them because they knew I was an insane person, a failure to them, a lunatic," Patient 1 yelled, and the traveler stayed quiet. "Look, I know I'm not like you guys, but don't think I know why. My life was ruined for some godforsaken reason just because a monster possessed me. You think I want all of this shit to happen after that?" Everyone stayed quiet, but the traveler looked furious. "You think you're the only one, but each one of us has our own story," he yelled. Suddenly, I heard thunder booming outside in the city. The traveler and Patient 1 continued to argue while everyone watched, but I could once again feel my spine shiver. Suddenly, people like Deshaun and Xavier stepped in to support one or the other side. Eventually, it led to everyone getting involved in a large brawl, except for me. Run, I tried to yell, but could only muster out a whisper. My throat seemed to close in fear. The Grim Reaper was at my door, and he was knocking. Part 27. Running from Death. I tried to tell them to escape again, but I saw the lightning flash from outside made me silent from fear. The next thing that happened, well, it all happened so fast. The entire door with its frame suddenly shattered and revealed the outside for a split second. The crap split up the wall to the roof, and a large chunk of the roof caved in. I fell to the ground and narrowly dodged the splinters of wood, but I felt my leg get spliced by a piece of wood. Imagine that, but all slowed down due to the extreme detail. Then, resuming in full speed. I groaned in pain, and as the rain fell on me from the broken roof, everybody else was on the grounds, in confusion and shock. Suddenly, I saw the red eyes emerge from the remains of the broken door below it. Some people slowly started to get up and tried to help others. Get into the city! Run! I yelled in pain. They looked at me, then looked at the red eyes. There was no way we could fight whatever that thing was. Suddenly, somebody stood up and grabbed their gun. They fired at the entity, but it wasn't affected. In the blink of an eye, it sped to the person and grabbed them and held them up by their head. They screamed in pain, but the entity suddenly crushed them. Their blood and brains splattered across the room, and some large parts of their body dripped from their hand. It looked toward the others. I knew that if I didn't run right now, I would be murdered. I stood up in pain, not bothering to look at my injury, which was now getting worse due to the rain entering my body. I ran through the remains of the joints and to a nearby store. I ran through the heavy mud as I heard people screaming and running, and the thing killing more and more. It was like someone had told people to go and play hide and seek, but if they found you, you would be killed. Suddenly, I felt an arm go around my neck. The arm was bloody. I gasped, but it was Deshaun. There was a large splinter on his elbow, but he carried me anyway. Thank you, I tried to say, but with the heavy rain and constant thunder, he couldn't hear me. Everybody's heart was pounding. We ran down the muddy street and finally reached a large mall. We both limped to the door, and I helped by pushing it open. We stumbled inside and fell to the ground as the door slowly closed behind us and blocked off the noise of the rain. I heard Deshaun cough as water and blood dripped off of me. What was that? Deshaun said weakly as he took off his mask because this was one of the buildings that we had purified. I don't know, I replied as I took off my mask as well and turned over to look at my leg. There was much more blood now because it had hit my thigh where a lot of my blood in my body was. I tried to reach forward to pull the large piece of wood out, but I was too weak to do it. I fell to the ground as my vision got blurry and my head got light and breathed quickly. Everyone could be dead by now. I hadn't warned them properly. I was a bad leader, and now their blood was on my hands. Suddenly, I screamed. Don't worry, I'll say why in a few moments. Deshaun held a bloody piece of wood in his hand and threw it down. He had pulled it from my leg. I winced in pain as he took off his wet jacket and tied it around my leg tightly. I tried to hide my pain, but he could already tell. This is the best I can do for now, Eric, he said weakly. It'll do, I said as I closed my eyes and set my head down to calm myself. Suddenly, I heard him fall over. I sat up and saw him on the ground. I crawled on my hands and knees to him and tried to figure out what was wrong. I'm just resting, he said, as I let out a sigh of relief. It didn't matter if we knew each other or not, as long as we were alive. We needed people for what we were planning to do and didn't plan for it to go terribly wrong at this moment. This night, just when we had found everybody, everything was going to hell. I turned to his elbow and winced in disgust. A wood piece was lodged in his elbow so that when he moved his arm, it moved with it like an extension of his bone. Can I? I asked, and he nodded, knowing that it eventually had to be done. I slowly grabbed onto it and pulled it out. He screamed in pain, and it echoed through the large mall. I threw it aside, and it skittered to a halt with a bloody trail. I looked around for a bandage to stop the constant flow of blood, but I couldn't find anything. I crawled around looking for a bandage and finally found a bathroom. I crawled inside and began to look for a paper towel or a bandage of some sort. Suddenly, I found a long towel in the sink for some reason. I painfully lifted myself up and grabbed it. Suddenly, I heard footsteps walking through the mud from outside near Deshaun. I quickly pulled myself up and stood on my injured leg. I winced in pain as I grabbed the towel and limped out of the bathroom. I quickly limped to Deshaun and fell to the ground to his elbow. I tied up his elbow and helped him up. I turned around and saw two red eyes walking down the muddy road and through the dense rain to where we were. I gasped as we tried to escape from it. I helped him up the stairs, and I turned around and saw that the eyes were gone. I started to hyperventilate again as shivers ran down my back. Suddenly, I saw the figure walk out of the bathroom where I just was moments ago. I felt his evil soul enter my body and infect me with a dark plague. I shook it off as it stayed still and watched me. I stumbled as I began to run up the stairs, away from the beast. I reached the top of the stairs and found it was just reaching the bottom of them. Suddenly, it pulled out a long double-bladed scythe from behind its back. It literally was death. It held it back and began to run up the stairs. "Run!" I yelled at Deshaun as we ran away from the stairs. The entity reached the top and slammed one end of the sharp scythe into the ground. The entire blade cut through it like butter. It was like a form of death, a grim reaper. Literally. It turned its daunting red eyes toward me as I turned her back around and continued to run. This was terrifying, and I was fighting for my life. We both left a gruesome blood trail, so that wasn't good either. The figure began to walk down the low hallway we were on and hit the supports, making it start to collapse, although it didn't quite yet. We ran faster and faster through the pain and eventually turned a corner. I saw Deshaun enter the shop on the right immediately after the turn. I followed him in as the entity continued to hit the pillars. Lightning struck and illuminated the inside of the mall for a split second as we ran deep into the shop. The figure came closer and closer, like a countdown to our deaths. We slid behind an aisle near the back of the clothing store and breathed heavily. "There needs to be something we can do, right?" Deshaun asked breathlessly. "I don't know," I said in fear and confusion. My heart seemed like any moment it could beat so hard out of my chest and kill me instantly. I looked from behind the clothing rack we were behind, but there was nothing outside except another flash of lightning. We were both silent, and all we could hear was the pitter-pattering of the rain outside. I could still hear the pillars collapsing from the entity, but the thing that made it worse was that I couldn't even see where it was. Thunder shook the entire mall as we both breathed heavily. There was no way we could outrun it. I gulped in fear. I had never experienced this much fear in my life since I was a kid. When I was much younger, around the year 2034, I used to joke to my college friends that I wasn't afraid of death. It was called thanatophobia, the fear of death. But I didn't have that, and I convinced myself I didn't. I had always been a daredevil, but one day it was serious. My friend had flunked all his subjects in college and had his relationship broken up and felt terrible about it. I only wish that he had talked to us before he did it. I was driving back to my dorm room in college from eating with my friends. They said that they would be back later, but I wanted to head back to check on him. I drove across the river and saw him on the edge. I quickly stopped the car, but it was too late. There was a long rope tied to the bridge pole, and his neck was now limp from trying to survive. He had killed himself, and I had never felt so much fear in my entire life. I stopped joking about my ignorance of death and started to become more serious. I graduated and moved to Colorado Springs, where I decided that it was better to revolt against the powers in the sky above. The storm came, and everything led up to this moment in the shop, breathing heavily and running from the personification of death itself, nearing the end of my life. I turned around and suddenly saw two red eyes through the glass door. I gulped as the entity held its scythe by its side. Lightning struck behind, and the flash from the window above it outside illuminated it. Its shadow seemed to stretch right to us and grasp us. I breathed heavily in fear as I heard a small bell ring from death entering the shop, coming to purchase our lives. Part 28. The Others Who Lived. Lightning struck outside and illuminated the shadow of the entity as it opened the door slowly. It quietly entered the shop just as thunder shook the building once more. I could hear the water dripping from its long black trench coat and off the brim of its hood. I didn't even need to look at it anymore, knowing that it would see me if I did. A terrifying night turned upside down into a little game that death wanted to play with us was not how I wanted the celebratory tonight of all the travelers meeting up to go. I expected it to be a night where we could plan the bright future ahead, to win a war, but now we were patrolled by a monster that we didn't know anything about. It could have come from the prison of the survivors, but it could have also just come from revenge from the deserts of Colorado, or it could just be death coming to purchase our lives. It slowly began to walk inside with wet black boots with spurs on them. It was like a bounty hunter had come to attack us, although we had done nothing wrong. I could imagine it slowly scanning the area where it thought we were, trying to rip open our skulls. From the spurs on its boots, I could hear it getting even closer. It seemed to be right behind us. There was no way out. Our time was up. Suddenly, Deshaun, the entity, and I all heard a loud clash outside. The entity slowly turned around, and in the blink of an eye, it sped out and exited the shop. Both Deshaun and I let out a sigh of relief, but we suddenly thought about what the sound was. We both slowly stood up. I want to investigate to see if that was another one that survived, but I think it's too late now, Deshaun said quietly as the thunder rocked the earth again. I decided that it was better to at least try, so I walked to the door from behind a clothes rack. Confident but scared, Deshaun followed me as I walked to the door. My heart beat faster and faster as I looked outside the glass window where the literal Grim Reaper was moments ago. I slowly opened the door, and we both walked outside and slowly shut it. We heard some weird noises on the first floor, but we weren't sure what it was. We walked past some vines that had grown on the ball's walls from the long time that no one had shopped there due to the apocalypse. We slowly walked away from the door and ventured to explore what was happening. We reached the balcony and slowly looked over to see what was happening. The figure, with its long, double-bladed scythe, stood over a smashed brick on the ground. It was a distraction, but from who? Suddenly, we were both grabbed by someone. We turned around, our hearts beating out of our chest again, and still trying not to scream due to the fact that we could be killed at any moment from the thing downstairs. It was Samantha. Deshaun smiled, and I nodded at her. She helped us up, and we began to walk toward the front door where Deshaun and I had tended to each other's wounds. Once we turned the corner, Deshaun and Samantha stopped to hug. "I thought you were dead," she said as we continued walking. "I thought you were dead," Deshaun responded quietly, and they looked at each other longingly. I decided to break up the unmarried lovebirds by asking an actually important question. "Have you seen anybody else? Who else survived?" I asked as we quickly descended the stairs to get back outside. "No, I haven't seen anybody yet. It may be just us. I distracted that thing over there so I could get to you guys, but the distraction won't last long," Samantha said as she put on her mask in preparation for going outside. We did so as well. "Well, that's good to hear," I said dismally as the rain continued to fall heavily from the sky. Samantha and Deshaun walked outside into the rain, but I suddenly heard footsteps coming from behind me, where the entity was before. I gulped as I turned around and saw the two red eyes under the hood. My heart went cold, and shivers ran up and down my body, seeming to paralyze me as I stared into the face of death. "Eric," Deshaun said as the entity began to walk toward me with its wedged trench coat. I finally broke free of its curse and turned around and walked outside quickly. I ran into the rain and followed Samantha and Deshaun. With every step I took, the mud seemed to sink me deeper and deeper into the earth. Everything wanted me dead. I turned around and saw the red eyes outside the door. I gulped as I continued to run up the street. Finally, I reached the top of the street and we all ran through the muddy street and dense rain past the remains of the traveler's joint. Every so often I turned around and saw the red eyes getting closer and closer to us, but I could never see it actually walking toward us. Samantha and Deshaun ran inside and I turned to find the eyes, but for the first time, I couldn't see it. "Eric, in here," Samantha said over the loud storm. I nodded and walked inside. I locked the door and took off my mask. I turned around to see many bloodied people. They were alive but very injured. At least they were the ones I needed. Xavier stood with a scared Harley in his arms next to Patient 1, who was sitting down with his hands in his face from the terror that he had seen. There were also many other travelers that had survived, but there weren't enough at all anymore. Patient 1 stood up and came to me. "It's a good thing you survived," he said outside. "It's a good thing you survived, Eric," he said over the loud thunder outside where the entity was, still waiting. "Yeah, but everyone else is gone now," I said morbidly as I looked around the room. Everyone seemed tired and injured and scared. I nodded at all of them and then turned to Patient 1, still by my side of the door. "Listen, Patient, could I talk to you for just a second in private?" I asked him. "Yeah, let's go over here," he said, as he led me to a corner away from the other people and away from the loud sounds of the storm raging outside with a killer in its midst. "Listen, I don't know what to do. I don't know if you've seen it lately, but it has a long, double-bladed scythe. Does that remind you of any mythical figure?" I said to him immediately after we stopped to talk. "Death," he said as a wave of realization rushed over him. "We're not being terrorized. We're being hunted by the Grim Reaper, by Satan. Look at them," I said as we both turned to look at the others. "It's like they're waiting for death to come and get them. There's nothing we can do. But I can't let this happen. I don't know what to do, Patient 1. I know you don't really see it or like to think about it, but you've dealt with a monster like this before, right? What did you do to get rid of it? No, I was about to die, and the monster saved me, which I really wish it hadn't. Also, the monster left me and abandoned me in an insane asylum with no way of checking in with my family. This is something new, and I have no idea what it is, Patient 1 said, giving me the sad but accurate truth. All right, well, can you at least help me think of a plan? I asked. What if we all run around the city so it goes for one of us, and then, when it doesn't expect it, we attack and just kill it? Patient 1 suggested. Just like a light bulb going off in my brain, just as lightning struck, I realized that his plan could actually work. But who would want to get right behind the monster itself? Well, don't hate me for this, but I was thinking that you would, Patient 1 responded nervously, scared of what I might do. My jaw dropped in utter fear of what it would be like to stand behind a large personification of death itself and try to attack it. Look, you've done a great job at being a leader, so I believe you can do it, Patient 1 comforted, but it didn't make it better. I still had to face death face to face. I still had to go against death face to face. But I started to try and make excuses, but I was cut off by many gasps from other people near the door. We both turned around, and I looked at what the issue was. There seemed to be nothing outside, but I suddenly saw a trench coat with two daunting red eyes underneath it once more. I started to hyperventilate as the thought of fighting the Grim Reaper entered my mind again. I couldn't do it. Lightning struck outside as it walked toward the door. Patient 1 and I quickly ran back up to the other people. Patient 1 and I quickly ran back to the other people. We got them all up and told them to move to the back of the room. They quickly got up and moved back. I saw Xavier comfort Harley as the entity got closer and closer to the door, about to seal our fates. Finally, it reached the door and looked directly inside. It opened the door as lightning struck again, illuminating the dark room that the entity had just entered to see us. Its long scythe was on its back at a crooked angle, for what I thought was soon to be covered in blood. It walked forward and I waited for it to kill us all, but something else happened. The figure stopped and pulled out something from its large pockets. When it pulled it out, there wasn't enough light to see its hand to confirm what type of animal or monster it was. It threw it to the ground. Was it a bomb? Was it another weapon? Suddenly, a large blue hologram popped up. It projected a man in a suit, which was facing the entity. The man in the hologram turned around and smiled as he took off his sunglasses. It's a great view from up here. I really love all the violence. It's quite entertaining. It's like a creature feature, he said. I scowled. It was Rye, holding a glass of wine in a full black suit. I especially like the part where the hero comes in, Rye said, implying that he was the hero in these dark times. I suppose that you've met my new invention by now, Rye said as he turned and signaled to the entity. I call it the Corpse Crawler, and I really think it's living up to its name, don't you think? Killing all your friends and crawling over them like a spider? Ooh, that's good imagery right there, Rye asked, and I breathed angrily. This night just got even worse and much more complicated. Part 29. The True Monster. You're behind all of this? I yelled at the hologram of Rye. Oh, it took you long enough, Eric, Rye said calmly. You're a monster, Deshaun yelled at him. Shh, the others might hear you. Yes, you may call me a monster, but I'm at least a good leader to my people and tell them what they want to hear. Isn't that right, Eric? Rye asked me personally. I tell them only things I know, I said, standing for what I believed in. Are you sure? He asked, and I went silent. Everyone looked at me, but Rye broke the silence. He began to walk around, and the hologram just followed him. He took a long sip from his wine and finally lowered it to look at us. You know, you're lucky the corpse crawler hasn't decided to kill you all yet. You see, he's told to deliver this message, no matter the cost of lives, but I could simply change that order and make him rip you all apart, Rye threatened us. I heard some people quietly gasp and cry in fear, letting it be known that they were scared. I knew I had to step up for them, even if I wasn't the best leader. What do you want? I asked, trying to hide my fear of my death happening at any moment. I want you to look around, he said. So I did. I looked at everyone shivering in the cold and shaking from the fear of death standing before them. Each one of them had blood, whether it was from their body or someone else's. "You caused this, he said. "No, I didn't. You're the one who sent this monstrosity after us in the first place," I said, a bit nervously because the entity was still standing there, but it stayed still, luckily. Rai stopped walking and started to focus. "Listen, you're only making me out to be the villain of the story because I sent a little creation of mine after you. But you've got it all wrong, buddy. The only reason I sent this beauty down to the surface to kill you all is to send a message." "And what's that?" I asked furiously, tired of Rai's lies. "I'm sending you a warning. Yes, you got my good attention by attacking the prison, and you almost defeated me completely. But hell, you lost something there, didn't you?" Rai asked, and I gasped. "Yes, in case all of you didn't know, Eric and his little stupid insurgents attacked the prison's main building and succeeded in denting my defense and numbers. What he didn't tell you is that he lost someone very important to his little rebellion of his," Rai said, exposing my secrets to everybody who was listening. "Don't," I started, but Rai dared to continue, and there was nothing I could do about it. Poor Agent 39 never escaped the poor little spaceship since. I mean, why do you think the prison hasn't landed in so long? We know what you're planning now. Everyone in the whole damn city knows. And that's the problem. That is the problem, Eric," Rai said, finally discussing Agent 39. "What's your problem then, Rai? Just let us live in peace and we won't bother you," I proposed, but Rai wasn't quite satisfied yet. No, I think you've passed that opportunity to give up a long time ago, Eric. Every time you attack, we try to cover it up. Yeah, big secrets. Except the whole city now knows about the travelers and their successful attempts to attack and take me down. It's getting out of hand. So I simply cooked up a masterpiece and sent it down to do some casual testing," Rai explained as lightning struck and illuminated the haunting shadow of the corpse crawler. "Casual testing to you is committing genocide on innocent people? Wow, great leadership there, Rai," I said. "What do you know about leadership? You let your only chance at an actually successful rebellion go down the drain just because he told you to leave. I've got to say that I was actually impressed with you, but now," Rai said as he walked into the darkness and started to walk near a cell. I gasped. "I have the upper hand." He finally reached the cell, and there was a sleeping Agent 39 on the ground. He was badly bruised and barely alive. "Let him go!" I yelled, but Rai suddenly stopped and looked at me. "Oh, let him go, you say? Tough. I mean, really tough. You put him in here in the first place. You just want me to let him go and slit his throat? I mean, if you want me to," Rai said as he suddenly transformed into a large monster. Everyone around me gasped, but Patient 1 looked in confusion. I didn't want to tell him that the monster that had betrayed him many years ago was most likely the monster that currently possessed Rai. "Stop!" I yelled as the monster began to reach its gooey arm into the cage and prepared to slash Agent 39 apart. "Well, about time," the monster said as it took its hand out of the cell. I was about to speak, but Patient 1 stepped forward. "What is that?" he asked, but I winced at him asking, knowing that I had just completely lied to him. "Just a little friend that I gained along my journey. Hello again, Patient 1, the monster said as it seemed to smile through its sharp teeth. Patient 1 turned to me in anger. "You told me that it was a different monster," he yelled at me. "Listen, I didn't want you to know," I tried to explain, but he was furious. "It has a white streak across its eyes. That is one of the easiest things I told you to look out for from the monster that had possessed me," he yelled at me in anger. Boys, calm down," Rai said as he transformed back into a human. "You lied to me," Patient 1 said furiously. "Oh, you think that I'm done with you, Patient 1? Oh, the monsters told me all about you. How you were a failure to your family, a liar, a cheater, and a robber. My, too many secrets are coming out," Rai said as I looked at Patient 1. "You robbed something?" I asked him. I was dragged into it," Patient 1 explained, trying to defend himself, but was interrupted by Rai once more. "The monster also said that he always wanted to do it. He always wanted the money," Rai said. "Liar! I didn't mean it," Patient 1 yelled, but the entity stepped forward. Gentlemen, how about we make some amends later and talk about what I want now? Does that sound good?" Rai said as the entity stepped even closer to us. Fine. What do you propose? I asked quickly, preventing the corpse crawler from attacking. It stopped and stepped back. Finally! Finally! We're getting to the point. Thank God! Okay, here we go. I propose you stop attacking the prison of the survivors and influencing my people to fight against me. In opposition, my friends, the corpse crawler here, will rip you all to pieces, and we will call it a successful night. What do you say? Rai proposed. I thought about it, but I really wasn't sure. What should we do? I turned around to ask everyone else. They were still shocked by the many accusations flying all around to even comprehend the situation we were in anymore. I turned to patient one. He wasn't mad at me as much anymore, but he wasn't sure what we should decide in that moment. They all looked at me in silence as a rumble of thunder echoed through the city. These were the people I was tasked to use to commence a rebellion against a man who was standing right behind me on a hologram way up in the sky. A god. I sighed and turned around. I accept your offer, I simply said, and Rai smiled. Very nice. Now, the corpse crawler will continue to watch you, so don't try anything, Rai said as he walked away from Agent 39's cell. He walked back into the darkness and smiled evilly at all of us. I'll see you soon, he said as a hologram shut off, Rai's sinister eyes being the last thing we all saw. The hologram shrunk back into the small disc on the ground as lightning struck outside. We all stared at the corpse crawler in utter silence. Suddenly, it walked forward and picked it up, its hand once again not illuminated enough to confirm if it was a human or not. It picked up the disc. I sighed as it turned around. So, that's it? Harley asked, and I closed my eyes. I turned around, getting angry. Yeah, well, if you all just stare at me without saying anything, it's my decision to do something, right? I asked, and they nodded. I watched as the corpse crawler slowly turned around and to leave. But I sighed as I watched the corpse crawler slowly turn around to leave, but I thought of all the things that could be possible if the rebellion worked. With enough power, we could free Agent 39, and we could take down Rai. The only problem was that Rai was always going to watch us, so it would be risky. I closed my eyes and put on my mask. Everyone else did the same, knowing what was going to happen. I stepped back, took a deep breath, and ran toward the corpse crawler. I jumped up and faced my feet toward it. It didn't hear me or turn around because of the thunder that had deafened it. I screamed in anger at all the restrictions and many things that we couldn't do unless we were free, and kicked the corpse crawler. Everyone joined me as the corpse crawler smashed through the window and rolled onto the muddy streets. For the fallen, I said in remembrance of Agent 39, as we officially started the revolution. Part 30. A Sign of War. The corpse crawler looked at us with murderous intent in its red eyes and stood up. Lightning struck behind it as we all stood together against the Grim Reaper. It zoomed toward us, but we all moved, and it flew to the back of the store. We realized that there was finally enough hope to defeat this evil being. Our plan was on. Pieces from the wall fell off onto it as it stood up. It dusted off its black trench coat, which was now stained with blood. It adjusted its hood and clenched its fists. I stepped forward first. It stayed against the wall as I finally reached it. I reverted back to my original self, but changed. I was no longer scared of death, for I was ready to kill it. It tried to grab me with both of its hands, but I ducked and punched it in the face. It moved back, and I realized that there was probably no weapon that could defeat it, but like the other chaos monsters, only raw power from humans. It turned back to me as I punched it again. I lifted my leg to knee it to the side, but it caught my knee and shoved it back down. I tried to punch it again, but it caught my punch. It started to push my fist back at me, but I stayed strong, no longer afraid due to the new knowledge of its weakness. Eventually, I suddenly let go and punched it right in the middle of its body. Immediately, it kicked me back and I slid back on the floor. Lightning illuminated its dark shadow against the wall it was on as it slowly pulled out its long scythe. I gulped, but I suddenly saw someone jump on a box and leap toward it. Not noticing it, it suddenly was punched in the face by Harley. She blew on her knuckles as she stood up, blood leaking out of them. Xavier, Deshaun, Samantha, and Patient 1 all joined behind me as I stood up. I looked around quickly, trying to figure out how to get out of here. I kicked it against the wall as Deshaun stepped up and punched it in the knee. It fell to its knees and looked up again. There, Samantha punched it in the face and stepped back. It was like we were all taking turns beating it up. It swiped its scythe at all of us, but we narrowly dodged it and moved out of the way. It raised up into the air, slanted down, and lodged into the ground right in front of me. I smiled, knowing that it was weak now. I jumped past it and punched its face with its scared red eyes into the ground. I rolled to the side as everyone started to kick it. It laid still, now angry. I walked back to the front of it where it suddenly grabbed me. and we zoomed away from the others. I quickly looked in fear as I sped away so quickly. It smashed us through the other window, and we flew into the rain. It stopped on the muddy streets and turned to face the other long street. It shoved my face in the mud and quickly dragged me across the road. I winced in pain as tears of blood came out of my eyes, but I couldn't do anything about it. Suddenly, it threw me into a window into a building at the end of the street. I crashed through the window and lay on the ground of the stone away from the rain as I felt my organs finally shift down. Quickly, I slid back on my bandana to prevent myself from immediately being killed from the storm. Mud covered my entire body as I felt blood slowly run down the sides of my face. I slowly sat up and ran my hands across my dirty face to clear my vision. I looked at them after I finished and saw a lot of blood. I looked to the window where I'd come from and saw the corpse crawler with its red eyes looking at me with pure hatred. He watched me with his scythe in his hand as lightning struck above him, illuminating the dark streets. I slowly got up, knowing that I had to continue fighting no matter what. Suddenly, it zoomed toward me once more without warning and slammed me into the back wall. It held me up by my throat as I started to suffocate. I tried to kick it, but it wasn't affected whatsoever anymore. Everything started to go dark and blurry, but I was suddenly lifted and thrown out of the window onto the muddy street again. I groaned as I slid on my bandana again, now beginning to tear. I turned over on the street with blood running down my face like tears as the rain started to burn the wounds on my face and body. Suddenly, the corpse crawler came from the store and looked over at me. He held his scythe near my neck, ready to slice it and end this all. I gulped as it raised it above its head and prepared to end my life. It was death itself. A long scythe with red eyes under a black hood. The Grim Reaper raised its scythe higher, making sure that it really killed me as I closed my eyes. The term Deus Ex Machina is one that I don't like or use. It's Latin, and it means God in a machine, which basically says that something along the lines that someone or something unexpected is about to come and save the day. Well, this was the only instance in my entire life so far where I had my full faith in it. And it worked. I heard a loud noise coming from the corpse crawler above me, so I opened my eyes, but it was gone. Next to me on the ground was the corpse crawler, struggling to stand up in the deep mud. Suddenly, Patient One ran to me. I sighed. He was my Deus Ex Machina at that moment. He helped me up and provided support to me. Did you think you could simply fight it all alone? Patient One asked. I smiled as the corpse crawler finally got up. At least you came. All right. Stay out of this, he said as he walked toward the partially destroyed traveler's joint and set me down against the broken wall. I'll handle this. Wait, your mask! I yelled at him, but I remembered that he was the special one and could survive without it. I don't remember all the exact details because I was so weak, but I could say that he was born to fight death. Through the dense rain, I watched as the corpse crawler sped to him with its long scythe. Patient One punched where it would be before it even arrived and got hit back to the store where I had been hit back. I smiled as he walked toward it and started to punch it in the face. This is what you get when you hurt my friends, he yelled over the sound of thunder and rain happening all around him. The corpse crawler grabbed his fist, but he kicked it in the face and continued to beat him up. Finally, the corpse crawler kicked him all the way down to the street and sped to him, ready to strike with its scythe. I gasped in shock at his inevitable defeat, but he caught it right before the sharp blade even touched his skin and pushed him back up and punched him once more. Immediately after, he spun around in the air and kicked him in the face. This time, the corpse crawler flew back near me. I smiled, so proud of him. I was like a father watching my son play soccer. I knew that he didn't have any right to protect me or any right to fight with us, but he was doing the right thing because of us. The corpse crawler angrily stood up, tired of his stupid games, but then it turned to me instead. I gulped in weakness as it started to walk toward me dauntingly. I saw Patient One running as fast as he could toward me, but I wasn't sure if he would make it in time. The corpse crawler spun its weapon in its hands as thunder rocked the sky at the same time, another lightning bolt illuminating the sky. Suddenly, it punched where I was but simply hit the wall behind me because I rolled onto the ground. I quickly stood up and entered the destroyed remains of the traveler's joint. I reached to the ground and picked up a large cinder block that was part of the wall and smashed it in its head, and it moved back from the recoil, but quickly turned back to me. It swung its long scythe at me, but I ducked, and it lodged into a remaining standing part of the wall. I could tell that it was tired and weak now due to the fact that it was slow and not zooming around anymore. Finally, Patient 1 reached me, but I gasped as the corpse crawler dislodged his weapon and swung it at Patient 1. It impaled him, and I screamed in sadness as it flung him against another remaining pillar. He fell to the ground, defeated but hopefully not dead. The corpse crawler turned back to me. You haven't won, Rye! I yelled over the loud storm, but it continued to walk toward me and slam its scythe into the ground below me. I jumped out of the way as it entered the ground. It pulled it out and slowly walked toward me with murderous intent. Your death! You're the Grim Reaper! I yelled, but it continued toward me. I yelled in shock as a piece of large rubber fell from above. It hit the corpse crawler in the head, but it just continued strolling toward me like a murdering machine. Suddenly, I tripped over something and laid on the wet stone. It raised its scythe high above its head and prepared to strike me for the final time. Just as lightning struck once again, Patient 1 stood up and lodged a large piece of wood into their chest. Red blood sprayed down onto me as it dropped its scythe. Patient 1 fell to the ground as the corpse crawler held its chest where it had been stabbed. I ran to Patient 1, but his eyes were already closed. I checked his pulse, and he was alive. Barely. Suddenly, I saw the others come out from the building where they hid while the fight went down and came to me. I stood up and away as they carried Patient 1 away from the traveler's joint. I turned back toward the corpse crawler who was still on its knees. I kicked it in its back and it fell over. Suddenly, lightning seemed to strike it directly, although it was very close. I rubbed my eyes from the flash, and when I looked back, it was gone with its scythe. I saw many footprints with a blood trail in the thick mud. I knew it had escaped, but we had sent a warning to Rye this time. I looked up to the sky as I began to see light. The rain finally stopped, ending the bloody night. I limped out of the remains of the joint and walked to where the others had taken Patient 1. The next day was full of recovery and rebuilding. I helped around, but all the destruction from the corpse crawler couldn't be fixed in one day, especially from such a group of little people. We had a large pit outside the city with 3 white body bags from the people we had lost. We had a large pit outside the city with several large body bags from people we had lost. It didn't seem like much, but there really weren't many of us left. We burned the pile, and I went to check on Patient 1. Somehow, he was still unconscious. I wished I could ask him things, but it would have to wait. I sighed as I walked out. How is he? Harley asked as she came up to me. She put on fingerless gloves as we walked through the dry dirt street. Luckily, he'll live, I said. She nodded as we walked past the reconstruction of the traveler's joint. It would probably take a week if we try hard enough, and no personifications of the Grim Reaper showed up again to ruin it. Well, everybody's talking about it, Harley said, starting a new conversation. What, last night? I asked. Well, yes, but your decision to fight and continue to rebel against Rye, she said, as we stopped. I knew this would come back to haunt me. I mean, everyone heard it. Agent 39. He's the one guy who really made an impact, and he's the one who can really make a difference, so we really need him, I said, finally telling the truth for the first time in a while. I mean, I support it, she said, and I looked at her in shock and confusion. I mean, I've heard some people from that mission talk about him and how he could really make it all happen. Well, that's good to know. Let's spread the word, I guess, I said as Deshaun and Samantha walked up to us. Hey, what's up? Samantha asked. Oh, we're just chilling, Harley said, and I nodded. We all looked around. I've got to say, it's much better when the sun is out. It makes it much better and less dangerous, Deshaun said. We all laughed. Hey, have you seen Xavier? Harley asked them. No, we thought he was over here, Samantha said. Suddenly, Xavier ran up to us. There you are, Harley started, but she stopped when we all noticed that he was out of breath. I walked up to him and put my hand on his shoulder to comfort him. Hey, what's wrong? I asked. You need to see this, Xavier said nervously. I was about to ask what it was, but then I noticed them. A large group of survivors were at the border of the city. They all had masks on with large guns. They were about double the size of our group. I ran to them and everyone else followed. We all arrived a little bit away from the border of the city. You want to go talk to them? Samantha asked me, and I reluctantly nodded. I have to. I walked away from them to the edge. From their group, a man walked forward. I reached the city's edge and shook his hand. Hello there, my name's Sam, and we are the Outcasts. Sam introduced himself. And my name's Eric, the leader of the Travelers. And my name's Eric, the leader of the Travelers here, I said as we finally stopped shaking hands. Well, you're the ones who are keeping Xavier, eh? Sam said, and I looked at him in confusion as the hot sun beat down on us. Keeping him? I think you've got it wrong, I said nervously, but Sam continued. Xavier is from the Outcasts. He was told to see if you guys were real and come back to us. I see that he has betrayed us. I suppose that he's told you we were coming to reclaim all of what is ours, correct? Sam asked, and I turned toward Xavier in anger. He scratched the back of his neck nervously. Yeah, he did, but we just had a rough night, and we can't really fight anyone right now, so can you guys go back to where you came from real quick and just leave us alone for around a month, I began to say to protect Xavier, but annoyingly, Sam continued to talk. We're from the outbacks of Montreal and Canada, Eric, so no, we're not going back to whence we came, and you're going to give us him now, Sam said angrily as he pointed at Xavier. And this patient one I've heard so much about can come with him. How do you know about, I started, but it was cut off again. Listen, son, give us what we want, and we'll leave your city alone, he said. I knew I couldn't just give up some of our best men just because they wanted them. Final warning, Sam said as he pulled out his gun and checked if it was loaded. I gulped. All right, why don't you come in and we'll talk about the details, all right? I asked, making a strategic move to stall for time. He nodded and signaled to the people behind him. I jogged back up the hill to the others. What did they say? Harley started, but I had no time. They want Xavier and Patient One, but I'm gonna try and not give them to them, I said as the outcast began walking up the hill. Deshaun cursed under his breath. This ain't good, man. Especially after what we pulled last night with Rye. I looked up to the mountains to make our conversation not look suspicious and saw two daint red eyes under a large black trench coat in the hills. Now, we have two problems. I know, but now's not the time to start another war. I'll see what they can do. And I nodded as they ran back to the city. I looked at Sam and smiled. This was not planned, and I was not looking forward to fighting two wars that we had no chance to win. This episode was recorded and written by Tristan Kumar. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out Act 7. Act 7 is The Severe Conflict. That'll be coming out shortly. If you enjoyed this, check that out. And make sure, this is Volume 2. This is the new one. And make sure you've seen Volume 1 because that provides a lot of character info and backgrounds. Anyway, have an excellent day. Thank you. Bye.